Ichigo Kurosaki, the substitute Soul Reaper and the savior of the Bleach universe, who in the current Hell Arc timeline of the story appears to work as an English translator, and he has a child of his own called Kazui Kurosaki. His journey from the beginning to the end of the Bleach story is nothing short of extraordinary. The personal growth that he has, as well as all of the insane battles that he partakes in, have resulted in him being more than just an average Shinigami. He had risen through the ranks of power to quickly surpass the strength of even a lieutenant, as well as standing head to head with some of the most powerful captains in the story. Ichigo's evolution did not just stop there. He eventually transcends into a being that rivals the power of the creator of the Bleach universe, the Soul King. By the time that Bleach ended, it was like Ichigo was a divine figure. The full extent of his power was really difficult to fathom. This leads us to wonder just how powerful did Ichigo become by the end of the 1000 Year Blood War arc? What exactly were the upper limits of his power? Is it true that he is the strongest character within Bleach? Is it possible that Ichigo could be more powerful than the Soul King? Well, after a massive amount of research and diving deeper into the story than I have ever done before, I believe that I found the answer to some of these questions. Be sure to stick around until the end of this video if you want some definitive answers as to how to properly power scale Ichigo with all of the power that he possesses at the end of the 1000 Year Blood War arc. So without further delay, here is my complete breakdown and analysis of Ichigo Kurosaki's world-shattering power. Just how Ichigo trains relentlessly to perfect his incredible powers, I've been diving into a world of training and strategy too. Pocket Champs, the free-to-download game available on iOS and Android, allows you to coach your very own champ, training them to unlock their full potential so that they are ready for the races ahead. If like me you love the spooky and frightening holos from Bleach, then you're going to really love the upcoming Halloween event from Pocket Champs. In this game, you need to make the right decisions by selecting the best race strategy before racing against other players across the globe. There are a ton of rewards to claim, including legendary gadgets, and not to mention unique and memorable skins and much more. The best part about all of this is that Pocket Champs is free to download on both iOS and Android, and my viewers have specially been selected to receive a starter pack which includes 500 gems and this amazing White Wolf skin. All of this is valued at $15, and it's all yours to have if you download the game before October 31st. So join me on this epic adventure by using my special link in the description or by scanning the QR code that you see on screen. I cannot tell you how much you are supporting the channel just by simply downloading the app via my link. In return, you get an awesome game with some exclusive rewards for being my viewers. Now let's get back to the topic of the video. Power scaling Bleach isn't an easy task. This is because Kubo often writes in a manner where he uses metaphorical and poetic speech when he describes the powers and abilities of his characters. This often leads to people assuming that Bleach as a whole is filled with contradictory statements as well as vague implications of what power represents. However, when you dive deeper into the narrative of Bleach, it often reveals that Bleach maintains consistent logic when it comes to its power scaling, and this consistency has been further reinforced by the additions that have been made to the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. In order to consider Ichigo's power at the end of the Bleach manga, we need to first determine how powerful he was going into the 1000 Year Blood War arc and how his power progresses during the course of this final arc of Bleach. So I'll do my best to provide a general overview of Ichigo's power during the Fullbring arc, because I do want to make some dedicated videos discussing how powerful each of Ichigo's forms were. So there are two power ceilings that I'm going to use in order to determine Ichigo's Fullbring bankai power. The first would be Bankai Yamamoto, and the second is going to be the version of Yhwach who ended up killing Yamamoto. Yamamoto's bankai power was stated to endanger the entirety of the Soul Society. Now, no matter how you scale this statement, it can be interpreted as a planetary threat at the very least. Now, you'd notice that I'm being extremely conservative with how I'm scaling Yamamoto. This is because I only want to establish the baseline of power going into the 1000 Year Blood War arc. This version of Yamamoto ends up being killed by Yhwach, who then confirms that he was the only one who could control the power of Yamamoto's bankai. So this confirms that despite how underhanded Yhwach's tactics were in terms of killing Yamamoto, Yuha still at the very least had proven that he was comparable in strength to Yamamoto. He had only ordered Lloyd to fight Yamamoto in order to break and humiliate him, and contrary to what some fans may say, this isn't because he wasn't confident in how he would fare in a battle against Yamamoto. This is further supported by the fact that Yhwach used nothing but a single slash in order to kill Yamamoto after taking away his bankai. You could chalk it up to Yamamoto being exhausted or demoralized, but it would still be undeniable that Yhwach had confirmed he was at the very least as powerful as Yamamoto. Delving deeper into this, chapter 565 reveals that when Yhwach had defeated Yamamoto, his power and wisdom ended up being assimilated into Yhwach. Now this concept may appear to contradict what we learn about in the one-shot chapter No Breaths from Hell, but when you consider Hashwald's explanation in chapter 604, you realize that what Yhwach absorbs has nothing to do with Reishi. Despite being depicted as traveling energy, it in fact has nothing to do with Reishi, but instead is Yhwach absorbing power itself. So in simple terms, Yamamoto's soul was dispatched to hell while his power had remained with Yhwach. For some reason, fans believe that Yhwach didn't end up getting Yamamoto's power, despite the final arc explicitly stating that every death in the war between the Shinigami and the Quincy serves to make Yhwach more powerful. So now that we've got this out of the way, this is where Ichigo comes in. An exhausted Ichigo who had used up almost all of his spiritual energy within Kilgate Oppi's jail had finally arrived onto the battlefield. Despite the handicaps that Ichigo had, he was still able to fight this empowered version of Yhwach. He even succeeded in wounding him with a Getsuga Tensho. Of course, I would like us to note that this version of Ichigo who had fought Yhwach isn't exactly the same as his normal bankai self. Yhwach explains that after pushing himself to the limit and absorbing bits of Kilge's Reiatsu, it had awakened powers deeply hidden within Ichigo. This would mean that this version of Ichigo, despite being physically exhausted, was tapping into a much higher reserve of power than he originally had. This is further supported by the fact that Ichigo uses Blutveen, a power that was previously inaccessible to him during this fight. The anime also has a fantastic addition here revealing that Ichigo was tapping into a deeper level of his hollow powers also, which is why his Reiatsu blazes red. So it would be safe to assume that Ichigo was powered up to a level that we haven't seen before when he had first encountered Yhwach. This version of Ichigo was able to push Yhwach to the point of fighting at full power. Now it's important to note that Yuha was also aware that Ichigo had stood no chance against him. Given everything that we know about Yhwach's character, you can safely assume that he would have easily defeated Ichigo if he had felt like he was genuinely threatened by him. So we can summarize that Yhwach was at the very least equal to Yamamoto's full power, and he still needed to get serious against Ichigo even after he had taken Yamamoto's power. So this would place Ichigo before his Zero Division training at the very least above planetary levels of power, implying that full-bring Bankai Ichigo was stronger than Bankai Yamamoto. Now the idea of this version of Ichigo being stronger than Bankai Yamamoto is very consistent, since Ichigo had started to unconsciously tap into his true power when he was in this form, and when I begin to talk about true Shikai and Bankai Ichigo, the gap between the two will be that much more obvious. So we can conclude that before Ichigo gets any of his war arc buffs, Ichigo is at the very least above Bankai Yamamoto but inferior to base level Yhwach's full power. After Ichigo's crushing defeat at the hands of Yhwach, he is left confused and powerless. But following his soul-searching journey of understanding himself and the truth behind his birth, Ichigo becomes worthy of receiving his true power. From this point onwards, during the 1000-Year Blood War arc, this is the version of Ichigo that we witness. So building off of Old Man Zangetsu's explanation about how much of Ichigo's powers he had been restricting, we can assume that this might be the most powerful version of Ichigo that we have ever seen, because for the first time ever, Ichigo's full potential is completely unrestricted. So this version of him will be able to grow to the peak of his true potential, which is quite exciting to even imagine. Over the course of this video, hopefully you'll be able to find out what Ichigo's peak really is. Now I'm going to be starting off by examining the range of techniques that Ichigo has in his arsenal, as well as the skill that he possesses. Ichigo's arsenal of abilities is often underestimated by fans, and this could be due to Kubo rarely having Ichigo use certain abilities in specific ways more than once throughout the duration of the narrative. So ignoring Ichigo's basic Shinigami skills like his mastery of Zanjutsu, Shikai, Bankai, as well as Shinigami techniques like Flash Step, let's see what truly impressive techniques that he possesses. So the first is Ichigo's most iconic technique, the Getsuga Tensho. It's a massive torrent of spiritual energy that is condensed and released as a highly destructive slash. The power and lethality of this ability increases along with Ichigo's spiritual energy. So the greater spiritual power that Ichigo has, the more powerful his Getsuga Tensho becomes, which is what makes it an ageless technique which he has no need to outgrow or cast aside because its power increases along with him. There are other variations of the Getsuga Tensho, like the Dark Getsuga Tensho that he learns from Hollow Ichigo, but it becomes a palette swap for his Bankai Getsuga Tensho, so I don't think that it's worth mentioning. Another impressive power within Ichigo's arsenal are his hollow powers. They greatly enhance his physical abilities and grant him access to hollow abilities. Now he can use Sonido and shoot Seros, and in the final battle with Yhwach, Ichigo showcased a whole new level of mastery of his hollow powers. Ichigo merges a Grand Ray Sero with a Getsuga Tensho, and he fires off a devastating attack towards Yhwach. Now this highlights a whole new level of mastery of his hollow powers, but in my opinion, his greatest ability that originates from his hollow powers is definitely his high-speed regeneration. Unfortunately, it is pretty hard to distinguish if this is a consistent power that Ichigo possesses, because the only time that we ever see him use it is when White takes over his body. High-speed regeneration may be a power that Ichigo unlocks after he completely masters his hollow powers, because being able to heal any fatal wound is definitely a game-changing power. Now on Ichigo's Quincy side, we only know that he has access to Blutveen, which we don't really see him utilize outside of the first time when he had accidentally activated it. Now probably the most greatest weapon in Ichigo's arsenal is his final Getsuga Tensho, or the Mugetsu. This is a technique that merges all of his powers together, and it allows him to become the Getsuga itself. It fires off a dark Getsuga Tensho stated by the databooks to be more powerful than anything that we have ever seen within the Bleach story. This attack, however, comes with a drawback for Ichigo, as he ends up losing all of his powers after using it. So Ichigo actually utilizing Mugetsu is mostly out of the question when it comes to his battles. Now despite his seemingly limited moveset, what makes Ichigo shine in battle is his skill as a fighter. You'd be surprised to learn just how many anime fans overlook this, so let's talk about why Ichigo is one of the most skilled swordsmen in all of anime. Contrary to what fans think, Ichigo doesn't just randomly swing his sword around really fast. It's not surprising that a lot of anime fans reduce all of his skill down to this point when they don't really even understand Ichigo as a character himself. Ichigo has had multiple mentors throughout the story, from learning the most basic ways of using his Shinigami powers from Rukia to being taught basic swordsmanship by Urahara, and then building on that foundation all by himself through his multiple experiences. Ichigo is an undeniable genius when it comes to the sword. And this is not to mention his training that he receives from Old Man Zangetsu and Hollow Ichigo. While Bleach does prominently feature several powers and abilities when it comes to its fights, swordplay still remains an integral part of Bleach's battle system. I mean, this idea of Bleach characters not being actual swordsmen is about as valid as the argument that Goku isn't an actual martial artist. Now returning to Ichigo, it is evident that he has an abnormal rate of growth when it comes to his power. He has strong instincts that guide him through every move in battle, and this is the most evident with how his journey actually begins. Ichigo was taught the basics of Zanjutsu by Urahara before he had left for the Soul Society. Yes, you heard right, Ichigo had challenged the Soul Society despite knowing nothing more than the basics of swordsmanship that his opponents have in fact been studying for hundreds to if not thousands of years. Now when Ichigo did arrive to the Soul Society, most of his early opponents were too weak to be a threat to him, but he had met his first hurdle when he had faced off against Ikkaku. Despite how much crap that we might give Ikkaku for his weak Bankai and Zanpakuto, he is easily one of the most skilled swordsmen in the entirety of Bleach. He's known to be the one who taught Renji Zanjutsu, and he currently runs a dojo where he teaches Renji's daughter Ichika the basics of swordsmanship. So it's plausible to state that Ikkaku is an incredibly skilled fighter. He actually has quite the reputation as a fighter amongst the Shinigami, which is what had led to Renji seeking him out when he was newly recruited into the Gotei 13. Ichigo had not only fought Ikkaku on equal footing, but he was able to see through all of his attacks and tactics, and he had even earned his respect by the end of their bout. Ikkaku even suggests how strange it is that Ichigo, despite being a novice, had expert level reactions and skills. Ikkaku assumes that a novice like Ichigo can't keep up with the multi-directional movements of Hozokimaru, but Ichigo was able to see through all of his attacks, which is insane when you realize that by the time that Ikkaku had released his Zanpakuto, Ichigo was fighting with only one eye, because he had bled so much into his left eye that he could barely keep it open. With the handicap of only having one eye, it was more than enough for Ichigo to completely read through the the insanely dynamic movements of Ikkaku. It is after he fully understands his opponent's moves that he is able to use that knowledge to defeat him. And this is a talent that Ichigo exhibits several times during his battles throughout the series. During his battle with Renji, Ichigo uses his highly analytical mind to predict and figure out his attack patterns before catching him off guard with the Getsuga Tensho and defeating him. This was a clever move on Ichigo's part by adapting to the situation by using a technique to defeat an enemy that he was too slow to land a hit on. This is part of the reason why Ichigo is such a deadly fighter. During his battle against Kinpachi, he was fighting an enemy who was stronger and faster than him, and he was using nothing but his skills and instincts until he ended up receiving support from Zangetsu. Now, thanks to the culmination of knowledge that Ichigo had learned from fighting these highly skilled Shinigami, which had allowed him to be prepared enough to battle against Byakuya at the end of the Soul Society arc. While the early portions of Byakuya vs Ichigo occur off-screen from Byakuya's statements and Ichigo's own admission of Byakuya being unable to cut him, we can easily infer that Ichigo had grown to such an extent that he was on par to match Byakuya's skill that he has with the sword, which explains why Byakuya had immediately released his Shikai after, because he had to rely on its abilities in order to make a difference in their fight. Now, I want to drive home this point as much as possible because for some reason certain fans believe that Tensei Zangetsu speed was all that it took for Ichigo to defeat Byakuya, even though the story had made it clear that they were equals before Ichigo had even activated his bankai. This is actually proven later on when the two clash swords again inside Senkei and they fight pretty evenly with each other, despite the fact that Ichigo had slowed down considerably by this point in their fight. He's still able to react to Byakuya's attacks even though Byakuya was now the faster one in their fight. It's this that makes it evident that Ichigo's greatest strength isn't his power or speed, but rather his ridiculous ability to adapt to opponents and his sharp instincts. Ichigo's immense innate talent with the sword literally allows him to gain centuries worth of skill over the course of one story arc and 4 fights. There's almost no character in fiction with this level of talent. I'd honestly appreciate it if more respect was put on Ichigo's skills as a swordsman, because he truly deserves it. His prowess with the blade only continues to grow as we venture deeper into the story. When he fights against Grimmjow in his Resurrection form, Ichigo has to deal with adapting to an enemy who has a fighting style that he has never encountered before. For context, Ichigo was fighting an enemy with about 7 different weapons. His claws on both hands, his protrusions on both arms, as well as his feet and his tail, which Grimmjow was all using at the same time. Despite all of this, Ichigo was still able to hold his own against him, all the while dealing with his lack of concentration thanks to the mental restraints that he had put on himself due to being worried about Orihime's fear of his hollow mask. When Ichigo battles Ukiura within Los Noches, he's outclassed in every possible way, but he ends up using his previous experiences fighting a bare-handed Ukiura in order to predict his movements when he's using a sword. This enables him to predict the movements of an enemy who was massively faster and stronger than him, until it reached a point where Ukiura had decided to completely switch up his style and attack speed so that Ichigo would then struggle against him. But even then, Ichigo was still able to adapt enough to give him a run for his money. This was to the point where Ichigo had forced him to go above the dome so that he could fully overpower Ichigo with his overwhelming strength. The skills of Ichigo are probably most evident after he loses his powers during the Fullbring arc. Despite having the speed, power and durability of a regular human, Ichigo's skills and his experiences from his battles as a Shinigami are still present, and this is what makes it easy for him to deal with entire groups of armed enemies without so much as a scratch being landed on him. Ichigo even explains that his combat experience was much greater than that of the Fullbringers, and it's most likely the reason why he had almost no real difficulty fighting Ginjo despite the fact that he had stolen his powers. During the 1000-Year Blood War arc, Ichigo's skills have become so great that he can casually fight off multiple Stenritters at once while greatly restricting his power. He essentially beats the Bambis bare-handed until he has to draw his Zanpakuto, and even then he barely uses any attacks aside from casually avoiding their attacks, and the anime further elaborates upon this via some anime-exclusive fight sequences. Now, aside from the Getsuga Jujisho that he uses to take out Candice, as he uses the Bambi's very own attacks to take them out, which is another massive indicator of Ichigo's skill level and his growth that he has undertaken at this point in the story. He does have the most insane growth rate out of any character that I have ever seen, and seeing his success as a fighter only being attributed to his power and ancestry is pretty disingenuous. While yes, he is the stereotypical chosen one and he was born with a lot of perks, this has no role in how quickly Ichigo learns or adapts to enemies' abilities. This in fact can only be attributed to Ichigo's innate skill that he possesses. I really hope that I've been able to convince you of the fact that Ichigo's skills and his ability to adapt within battle is just unparalleled by anyone else. Now let's move on by speaking about the speed that Ichigo possesses. Scaling Ichigo's speed is relatively straightforward. Despite a few contradictory instances, characters within Bleach are often portrayed as moving at or beyond the speed of light. From vice captains reacting to Negacion, as well as Uryu outpacing his own shadow in the Soul Society arc, to Aranero moving faster than a literal ray of sunshine despite being one of the slower Espada, and not to forget Renji outpacing Mask D Masculine's light beam, and lastly Nimaya demonstrating that he can outpace his own shadow despite being near death. Throughout all of these examples, moving beyond the speed of light is a very consistent feat that has been accomplished by several individuals. Given the fact that Ichigo has demonstrated that he is faster than pretty much every character who has performed these feats, it goes without saying that Ichigo should be massively faster than the speed of light. He casually blitzes characters like Lil Toto and Giselle, who could perceive and react to Ashwalen, which is stated to be a beam of light. It's made more impressive by the fact that they performed this feat while beaten and exhausted. Ichigo is able to move so fast that characters who can move at the speed of light have difficulty perceiving his attacks. And you have to remember that these are feats that Ichigo had performed while he was heavily restricted in his Shikai state. It goes without saying that he would have been significantly faster after he releases his full power Shikai against Yhwach, and this isn't even considering the 10 times speed boost that Ichigo's perfect holification would give him. I say at least 10 times because Resurrection is often depicted as a multiplier that is equal to or greater than Bankai, considering that Tozen's holification is implied to give him an even greater power up than his Bankai, and that Ichigo went from being weaker than base Grimmjow in his Bankai to being significantly more powerful than Grimmjow with his Holo Mask on. Also, by the end of Bleach, the way that Ichigo utilizes his Holo powers is greater than the holification of Tozen, or the extent of power that he could release with his Holo Mask on. So by claiming that he has a 10 times speed boost is pretty much a low estimate, but let's go with that for now. One very underrated feat of speed that Ichigo performs while in his Horn of Salvation form is when he beats the reaction speed of Orihime. Now this may sound like a joke, but Orihime has always had some of the best reaction speed feats. There are moments where she's even been able to react to attacks that Ichigo is unable to. For example, in Ichigo's battle with Ulquiorra in Las Noches, Ulquiorra becomes much faster when he begins to take the battle seriously. He outspeeds Ichigo on all fronts, and had it not been for Orihime's intervention, Ulquiorra would have easily beheaded Ichigo with one of his attacks. But despite moving faster than Ichigo could perceive, Orihime was able to react to Ulquiorra and activate her Shunshin Rika in time to block the fatal attack. Now this isn't an outlier because Orihime does this multiple times in the story. During the Fullbring arc, when Ginjo was training Ichigo, Orihime has no problem keeping up with Ginjo's speed when he tries to attack her. She is actually able to react to his attack and even launch an attack of her own. During the final battle, Orihime has no difficulty perceiving Yhwach's energy torrents, and she reacts to them with no real difficulty. Even though Yhwach gets serious and begins to completely demolish Ichigo, Orihime is still able to react fast enough to his attacks in order to create a shield to block them. Although Yhwach uses the Almighty to bypass it, the fact that she was able to react to it is an undeniable speed feat. But when Ichigo activates his Horn of Salvation form, Orihime doesn't even see when Ichigo moves in front of her Shunshin Rika, and considering the fact that Ichigo also blitzed Yhwach immediately after and had forced him to get serious, I think this is a clear indication that Ichigo might have been faster than both of these two characters, which explains why Orihime could react to Yhwach but not to Ichigo. Now what is truly insane to fathom is that Ichigo can get even faster than this after we stack the 5 to 10 times multiplier that his true Bankai would give to him. It would make his already insane speed unimaginable. This in my opinion establishes that Ichigo is massively faster than light. Now moving on to the next aspect of my power scaling of end of series Ichigo, let's talk about how much power Ichigo actually possesses. When trying to determine how powerful a Bleach character is, Reiatsu is often the first thing that comes to mind. This is because spiritual pressure is the major currency involved in the battle system of Bleach, and it plays an absolutely pivotal role in any clash that occurs within the Bleach universe. This is extremely convenient since Reiatsu is often directly related to speed, resistance to hacks, effectiveness of hacks, and durability. One of the most important aspects to understanding Ichigo's full power is his Reiatsu Reiatsu. Luckily, scaling Ichigo's Reiatsu is much easier to do than it would be for other characters in the story. In order to understand why, we will have to continue tracking Ichigo's journey after he gains his true powers. After unlocking his true Zanpakuto, Ichigo goes through special training from the members of the Zero Division. While this did happen off-screen within the manga, the anime does give us an insight as to what had happened during his training via some anime exclusive scenes. This training scene serves as extended foreshadowing for Ichibe's dark plans for Ichigo, but it also provides us with some excellent evidence which helps to support Ichigo's power scaling. I'm of course talking about the anime exclusive scenes which feature Irazusando, the path with no entry to the shrine. The realm of Irazusando is a challenge meant to test the worthiness of a Soul King candidate. The trial serves to emphasize the fact that Ichigo is a true hybrid being, as he possesses the potential to become the Soul King, and Irazusando serves to test if he can live up to that potential. Now when thinking about it, I'd like to imagine it as a many are called but few are chosen kind of situation. The main challenge of Irazusando is walking down the path that the Soul King did, as they are made to feel the literal weight of all of the realms and to see if their power is able to support it. If an individual is able to withstand this weight, then they are deemed as a worthy candidate. Contrastingly, if they are overwhelmed by the weight, then they end up shattering from the weight of the power that fills them, which I'm presuming means that they end up dying. While Ichigo travels down this path, he receives visions from the Soul King's memories, which reveals that he was betrayed by the ancestors of the 5 great noble families. This is probably the first indication that points to Ichigo being worthy enough to be a Soul King candidate. After all, who else will be worthy of seeing the Soul King's memories if not a person who can walk down the same path that he did? Ichigo then has the weight of the worlds placed upon him, and it appears to be an excruciatingly painful experience, but Ichigo ends up surviving it. This is what cements Ichigo's validity as a Soul King candidate, and this entire anime exclusive scene is an excellent piece of evidence on what it means to be the Soul King. Fans have debated these details for quite some time now. Some fans claim that the Soul King sustaining reality isn't based upon him using his raw spiritual energy, but rather just as a result of him being part of a metaphorical machine that just needs a hybrid being to run it. Other fans claim that spiritual power has nothing to do with the separation of the worlds at all, and it was all done via the Almighty. Now this would mean that whoever became the next Soul King after him would not be required to possess an equal amount of spiritual energy as the current Soul King in order to maintain reality the way that it is. This means that Soul King candidates don't really need to be scaled to the Bleach cosmology or even above it, but thanks to these anime exclusive scenes, this argument has a lot of evidence against it. Even before Irazusando, there was lots of proof in the manga and the light novels that this notion was false, but it persisted due to mistranslations of the Can't For Your Own World light novels. This was from a sentence which stated that the Soul King's almighty power was what had created the worlds. The kanji that represented almighty power was wrongly translated into English as almighty. This misled people into thinking that the word was referencing to the shrift ability the Almighty, when in actuality it was referring to the Soul King's unlimited reserves of spiritual energy. This had cemented the fact that separating the realms was done without using any spiritual abilities and was instead done by utilizing spiritual energy instead. There's an even easier way of debunking this argument. If the Almighty was all that was needed to recreate the universe, then Yhwach would have destroyed the world immediately after awakening it. Instead, he needed to absorb the power of the Soul King before attempting to even alter reality. And when Yhwach tries to change reality, it's done once again without the power of the Almighty, but instead with his own raw spiritual energy, which begins to ravage the Soul Society. So Irazusando makes it even clearer by implying that in order to be worthy of becoming the Soul King, you'd need to be able to withstand the physical weight of all of the realms. When you put all of this evidence together, it makes it clear that being the Soul King would require you to literally scale to the Bleach universe. So that would imply that any Irazusando survivor has the power to regulate all of existence. So the Bleach cosmology is what will be used as the baseline for determining the spiritual pressure and spiritual power of end of series Ichigo. The Bleach cosmology consists mainly of the world of the living, the Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, and the Garganta which exists between all of the realms. There is also Hell as well as an unknown number of pocket dimensions called Valley of Screams, as well as the Dangai which connects the human world and the Soul Society. Now all of these extra worlds also exist within the Garganta. Now I'm going to take each of these worlds, determine their sizes, and then tie the combined energy it would take to maintain them all to Ichigo's power output. Since we have already determined that him being a successful Soul King candidate means that we can scale him to the Bleach universe. Starting with the Garganta, it is the largest area of the Bleach cosmology. It hosts the entire Bleach universe within its dark expanse. It is stated to be infinite, or at least infinitely expanding. It is also the boundary that the Soul King had created to keep the worlds that he had separated apart. So hypothetically, if the Garganta didn't exist, then all of the worlds would come crashing back together again, which would return reality to this singular primordial world. There are a number of statements that point to the fact that destroying the Garganta was a core part of Yhwach's plan. In chapter 627, Ganju states that if they lost, then the Garganta would also disappear. This again supports the fact that Yhwach's plan to destroy the worlds extended even beyond the three realms, and could be theorized to have even affected closed off realms like Hell, since they all existed within the Garganta. I guess I'll leave it for you guys to decide if the Garganta's destruction would have affected Hell, the Dangai, and the Valley of Screams. But coming back to topic, I believe that there is at least enough evidence to convince me that the Soul King has the power to destroy, create, and maintain the Garganta. So even before going over the sizes of the individual realms, we need to keep this fact in mind. So let's start by figuring out the size of the world of the living. There's a lot of evidence that forms a pretty clear picture of just how large this realm is, starting with the fact that the human world within Bleach is based directly on our universe. Despite the fictitious formation of the human world within Bleach, it seems to have ended up exactly like ours, and it shares multiple things in common with our world. It shares the same celebrities and music bands, as we see in chapter 58 with one of Ichigo's classmates mentioning Coldplay. We also have Rose mention Prince of Darkness, another band that exists within the real world, as well as Love revealing that he enjoys reading issues of Jump magazine. Publications like DC Comics are also acknowledged to exist within the Bleach universe, as Ichigo is seen to reference Superman in chapter 47. And it doesn't just stop there, as references continue from Bleach and into Burn the Witch, which is set within the same universe as Bleach, and it references the existence of Dragon Ball, which exists within the Bleach world of the living, with Noelle having the episode recap song as her ringtone. Now this doesn't just extend to the modern world, but also on a historical level. The person Ichigo respects the most is stated to be William Shakespeare, the famous author and poet. This leads me to believe that the world of the living has had the exact same history as our world, and along with that, it would also mean that they have had the same scientific discoveries as ours. I bring up scientific discoveries due to the fact that there are multiple number of cosmic concepts referenced in the world of the living that would not be possible if they hadn't had the same scientific discoveries as we have. I am referencing Ishin's statements about Masaki in Everything But the Rain, as he referred to her as the sun and describes her in a manner that perfectly fits the sun as we know it in the real world. Kubo even adds an illustration of Masaki acting like a star and being orbited by multiple planets, so it would be safe to assume that these solar systems exist within the Bleach world of the living. Ichigo goes on to even further call Masaki the center of their universe, which is again a scientifically supported idea, where suns at the center of a solar system form a mass of gravity which holds planets together within the solar system as they orbit around it. Once again, it's all impossible to make such analogies without a similar concept existing within the Bleach world. So all of this points to the fact that the world of the living within Bleach has a very similar universe to our own. With us determining the size of the realm of the world of the living, we can easily figure out the sizes of the other two realms. This is because there are multiple statements relating to them that fit in perfectly with the picture that we have created via our scaling of the world of the living. In terms of the Soul Society, in chapter 148, we see from Kaname Tozen's flashback that the Soul Society has a sky full of stars. This is enough proof that the Soul Society is at the very least multi-solar system sized. The Soul Society also houses the Muken, an infinite dimension within the Soul Society that is often used as a prison for beings that the Soul Society cannot kill. This means that the Soul Society could be considered an infinite dimension due to the existence of the Muken, but there's not much of a need to even use that as a basis. This is because the world of the living and the Soul Society are meant to be parallels of each other, so it makes perfect sense for the Soul Society to be universal in size, which is further supported by the day and night cycle that occurs within it, which results in the starry sky that I had mentioned earlier. So we can deduce that the Soul Society also exists in that same universal ballpark as the world of the living. This again is further supported by the data books, which also state that these two realms are parallel to one another. Turning our attention towards Hueco Mundo, it is described as a wasteland with endless sands. This has been stated several times over throughout the Bleach story, as well as in the data books and within the Bleach light novels. Hueco Mundo is also another parallel realm, so we can deduce that it is also universal in size. So we have 3 realms that are universal level in size, and they're held in place by the Garganta, which has to be infinite in size for this to even be possible. So going by the standard set by the Versus Battle Wiki, the Bleach universe tiers as Universal Plus, and hopefully after going over all of this evidence, it should prove that Ichigo, after his training at the Soul King's Palace, should at least have Universal Plus levels of spiritual power. So I think that there is enough proof to state that Ichigo is at least Universal Plus in attack potency and destructive capability. Now, considering that Ichigo scales above even the true powers of the Zero Division, there's no reason to believe that Ichigo shouldn't have the same range, since he's even more powerful than they are. This is further supported by the fact that even members of the Zero Division who awaken their true power are individually able to make all 3 realms of the Bleach universe tremble. Despite this, they are still weaker than the Soul King, Yhwach, as well as Ichigo after he acquires his true Zanpakuto. So to even describe Ichigo as Universal Plus is still a very conservative rating. You may be thinking that this rating sounds absolutely ridiculous, because after all, Ichigo does fight and even lose some battles before he gets to his final encounter with Yhwach. So am I saying that the Bambis or even Askin are universal in their levels of power? Well, this can be easily explained by bringing up the fact that Ichigo was restricting his spiritual energy so that he wouldn't unintentionally kill everyone around him. Ichigo maintains this restriction from the time that he descended from the royal palace, because there was almost no point where he wasn't alone until he had fought Yhwach. He only begins to unleash his true power when he reaches Yhwach's throne room. That's why all the characters in the vicinity begin to feel his power. It goes even further than this though. When he activates his Horn of Salvation form, he tells Orihime, who had no issue standing in the presence of Yhwach's spiritual pressure, to keep her shields up, as he begins to further intensify his spiritual pressure. We know that characters who have power in the godly tier can lower their spiritual power to a point where even characters significantly weaker than them can sense them, interact with them, and even hurt them. The perfect example being Aizen after he had merged with the Hokyoku. In order to terrorize Ichigo's friends without killing them, Aizen had to lower his spiritual pressure to a point where they wouldn't instantly die in his presence. This is also part of the reason why Gin, who was even weaker than Aizen in his base form, was able to almost kill him with Kamishini no Yari. So it's not an alien concept for characters to lower their spiritual pressure. Another example of this is when Kinpachi had fought against Gremmy with his eye patch on. This means that he had fought him with a considerable amount of his power sealed away, which is the reason why Gremmy's attacks were still able to cause him serious damage. I want to now move on to some of the insane feats of power that Ichigo displays during his final battle against Yhwach. Due to the limited number of times that we've seen Ichigo fight with his true powers, there's only a few feats that we have to go over, but they are still more than enough to validate the tier of power that Ichigo possesses. The first major feat that we get from Ichigo with his true Zanpakuto is from his battle with the Bambis. When Ichigo arrives, he crash lands quite far away from where he intended to, but it proves to be of little inconvenience when he instantly travels that distance and appears behind the Bambis with none of them even realizing what has just happened. For context, characters like Lil Toto and Giselle could perceive and react to the Ashwalen, which again, like I'd stated earlier, was a literal beam of light. They both were able to avoid the light of Ashwalen while in a heavily exhausted state, but despite this, they were still unable to perceive Ichigo's movements when he had appeared behind them. There's another instance when Ichigo demonstrates that he is massively faster than the Bambis. It's when Ichigo was able to appear above Candice even though she was attempting to attack him from behind. He's also shown to be capable of landing multiple punches on each of them at the same time, faster than they can even react to, which again shows how incredibly fast he is. He completely negates all of their attacks and barely puts any effort into his counterattack. The manga and the anime make it abundantly clear that he views them as nothing more than mild inconveniences. He also casually overwhelms Candice's attack with the power of the Getsuga Jujisho. You may be under the impression that Candice is a fodder Sternritter since she got stomped by Byakuya, but this is greatly underestimating her ability. The story makes it very clear that the Bambis are actually one of the more powerful members of the Sternritter, with Lil Toto and Giselle being the most powerful among them. Not to mention that thanks to the anime, we know that the reason that Candice had lost to Byakuya wasn't because he was much more powerful than her, but rather because she was exhausted from her battle with Ichigo, so she ended up running out of stamina and was taken out very easily. And when you consider that Byakuya's best feat was destroying the frozen body of Gerard, whose powers had been negated negated by Hitsugaya's ice, it's hard to really definitively say if Byakuya would have had any less trouble defeating a full-powered Candice. Ichigo's next set of feats occur during his final battle against Yhwach. He demonstrates that he is able to keep up with Yhwach and even impresses him on several occasions. Yhwach even states that Ichigo is so powerful that he cannot afford to take any chances with him, which fascinatingly is a conclusion that he comes to after exchanging only a few blows with him. The sentiment is carried further into their fight, where Yhwach breaks Ichigo's bankai in the future because he says that its power is too formidable for him to face. This is an absolutely absurd feat because Yhwach was easily the most powerful being in the universe at this time, but even he had feared to face off against the power of Ichigo's true bankai. This alone suggests that Ichigo's full power does scale to Yhwach's and maybe even above it, so it's unfortunate that people downplay Ichigo and claim he isn't relative to Yhwach, when even Yhwach himself categorically believes that he is. If you were to ask me, I believe that Ichigo's greatest feat within all of Bleach would be killing Soul King empowered Yhwach. This was a feat that Ichigo had performed while severely weakened. Yhwach even flat out states that Ichigo was on the verge of death before they had even began their final round. Yet Ichigo still had enough power to kill Yhwach in just one decisive hit. This is a feat that Ichigo performs not only once but twice. Ichigo's feats alone establish him as easily one of, or if not the most powerful characters in the universe. But the most terrifying thing about Ichigo isn't even how strong he is, it's the fact that Ichigo is still extremely inexperienced with his powers, and he has a long way to go before he can truly master them. So with everything that I've spoken about up until now, let's now turn our attention towards the potential that Ichigo possesses. Now that we have determined how powerful Ichigo is at the end of the 1000-year Blood War arc, the question remains as to how powerful he is within the Hell arc timeline of the story, or to put it better, how powerful he can be, after putting him at the same level as the Bleach cosmology due to the multiple implications of him scaling to it. You may be wondering if this is the limit to his power. Well, is it possible for Ichigo to grow any stronger? I believe that the answer to this question is a resounding yes. While scaling to the cosmology is the minimum baseline for viable Soul King candidates, this doesn't mean that this is the limit of their power. There's loads of evidence which supports the idea that beings like the Soul King not only scaled to the universe, but they had also transcended it. It is even outright stated that the Soul King transcended everything in the universe within the Can't For Your Own World light novels. But of course, it would be insane to use the Prime Soul King as our main source of evidence, since he has an inconceivable level of power above everybody else's within Bleach. Outside of Soul King empowered Yhwach, there's no other character who comes close to the levels of power that the Soul King at his prime had. However, Hokyoku empowered Aizen is probably the best example of just how insane the power levels can get for beings like Ichigo. After Aizen gains the power of the Hokyoku, he performs quite an insane number of feats. He destroys the Kototsu, a conceptual being made of reason, a being who couldn't even be interacted with using any form of spiritual energy, and Aizen casually destroyed it as a flex. This insane feat is made even more impressive by the data books, which state that the Kototsu is the administrator of time and space, which means that Aizen was being literal when he had implied that he had transcended the reason of the world. Aizen had become so powerful that universal concepts like time and space had meant very little to him. So it's understandable to assume that Hokyoku empowered Aizen can be scaled to a universal level of power. The data books also state that Aizen's final Hokyoku form was neither Shinigami nor hollow, but he had instead transcended into a divine being. Divinity in Bleach pretty much means it's something related to the Soul King, which isn't too far-fetched to say since even the Hokyoku was made up of Soul King fragments. I also believe that if Aizen had found himself within Irazu Sando, then he too would have passed the test successfully and he could be considered as a Soul King candidate. This would mean that Aizen eventually became a being who could have replaced the Soul King, which would put him in the same tier as most Soul King candidates. Now why does this matter? Well, despite being considered as a valid replacement for the Soul King, Aizen is still almost infinitely weaker than Dangai Ichigo, who had no difficulty in defeating him, which would mean even for beings who scale to the cosmology of Bleach, there still can be massive differences in power between them. And that's only looking at Ichigo's potential from the perspective of raw power. Ichigo also has an insane pool of abilities that he can learn to use due to his insane genetics. If you want to see more of a detailed breakdown into the potential of Ichigo's full power, then I recommend that you check out my dedicated video on this topic that I made a few months ago. So taking everything into consideration, conclusion, we can conclude that Ichigo can still grow far more powerful if he continues to train and master his abilities. By his own admission, he is nowhere near mastering his true powers. Despite his inexperience with his powers, he is still able to kill Soul King empowered Yhwach twice with the power of his true bankai. And not to mention that this was a feat that he had pulled off when he was weakened to the point of being close to death if we are to believe Yhwach's statements. So we've reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. How powerful do you think end of series Ichigo is? Do you think that he has gotten even more powerful since the time between the 1000-year Blood War arc and the upcoming Hell arc, which we have yet to receive? If you want to see me power scale other characters or other forms of Ichigo, then definitely let me know in the comments down below. I've really enjoyed researching for this video as it's been definitely a change of pace from my regular content. Make sure that you stick around to the channel by subscribing for more Bleach power scaling videos, as well as super exciting Bleach what ifs and Bleach theories that I'm going to be posting. Lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you in my next Bleach video. And before you leave, remember to check out today's sponsor by downloading Pocket Champs via my link in the description. If you enjoy my content, then you can support my channel through Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or even through YouTube by becoming a channel member. You will gain access to exclusive channel perks and a Discord server which I frequently use. So become a member of my Zero Division and be the first to know about my upcoming videos. And once again, thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.